cultures where many men are taught to carry the load alone, caregiving can become a breaking point. In this conversation, Jeffry sat down with Kyle Woody, founder of Jack's Caregiving Coalition, an organization redefining strength for men. Strength as presence, openness, and the willingness to stay when there's nothing to fix. What unfolded was a deeply human exchange. Jeffry and Kyle shared vulnerable moments where identity cracks, isolation sets in, and the weight of caregiving becomes real. Kyle traced his path from construction management into this work, shaped by an experience that led to changing how he saw himself and his role in the world. They spoke directly about burnout, how it builds when a man keeps going without support, without space to feel, and without a way to make meaning of what he's carrying. They also explored how society can get caught in semantics, where language does matter, but can sometimes pull attention away from the deeper truth. Caregiving, providing, loving, showing up, different language, same human responsibilities. Kyle reflected on how this experience reshaped his parenting and his relationship with his children, including what they taught him about presence, emotional honesty, and the courage to receive. Together, Jeffry and Kyle explored the cost of doing it alone and the power of connection, being seen, supported, and willing to let others in.
Kyle is not new to podcasts. He's done many of them. He hosts many of them. I'm very excited for this conversation. So welcome, Kyle. So glad you're here.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Honored and humbled for the opportunity.
We're blessed to have you here. I listened to a lot of those podcasts and looked at your website, and I really appreciated your mission statement. Help our team feel inspired to go to work every day, safe enough to leave their comfort zone, and fulfilled at the end of each day by the work that they do. And I'm curious if that's your experience as well and what that's like. And so this is a graceful lead into asking questions about who you are and what you bring to that mission statement and what your life is about.
Yeah, so that mission statement is designed to give me clarity for what my role is in the coalition. I was consulting a friend of mine who was also a founder of an agency, and he was sharing with me this idea that as founders, we have a lot of power that we can be unaware of. Basically, it's the founder's job is whatever the founder decides it is that day. He encouraged me to really get clear on what my mission is inside the organization. The organization of itself, of course, has its own mission statement, which is very different. But so I, did the homework and really tried to think about, what is my role inside the coalition and how can I know that I'm doing it well? And of course, like all mission statements, there are days when you knock it out of the park and there are other days that you don't. But having it written down and having decided what it is helps you understand that.
Thank you for that. I'm curious to hear a little bit about who the man is behind the mission, who you are and what your background is that lends you to be doing this kind of work, because this is not the kind of work that everybody does.
Yeah, so in 2011, my spouse was diagnosed with colorectal cancer shortly after the birth of our second child. And we had some dear friends who we were living in Virginia at the time. And our friends from California, where Sarah and I had met, traveled across the country to spend a week with us. And at the dinner table that first night, we were telling them all about what our plans were for their week. They said, well, that's nice, but we're not here for that. We're here to serve you. That was not particularly surprising because in a crisis situation like that, the hot dishes it's raining meatballs and spaghetti and all the things. But what was surprising was they were looking at me when they said that. And that did not compute. I did not understand. And so I said, I don't need help. I'm not sick. Sarah's the one with cancer. So, why don't you ask her what she needs? And they were stubborn and, explained to me that before they came, they consulted a friend of theirs who had been through this. And they asked him, how can we show up for this family and really make a difference? They had the wisdom to know they didn't know how to do that. They had never done it before. And he told them, serve the caregiver. They're always forgotten. And he knew from experience because he had been there, he had done that. And his name was Jack. And so Jack is a person who I've never actually met. I don't even know what he looks like. But in my head, he represents all of us. So he's the inspiration, and that's the motto that we come back to is we're here to serve the caregiver. And we think of ourselves as a hospitality company because that's what we do. We show up and we serve just like that family did for me. So I just happen to be the first person to be on the receiving end of his message.
What in you activated or created a sense of passion and direction? I mean, how did that move you to do what you're doing?
I think it started with more of like a dismantling of an identity, just sort of cracked me open. It was like, I recall it as a very jarring experience, very confusing and very emotional. I can feel my lump in my throat right now. Every time I visit it, I can feel that. I think it started me on a journey because no one had ever looked at me and said, you're a caregiver until that moment. I just started to like figure out what that meant and start to consider that, hey, maybe I am a part of this story. Maybe I do have an important role to play here. I'm not, I kind of felt at times invisible and, the clinicians didn't address me. I was just kind of this skin tag that was attached to Sarah going wherever she went.
Wow.
And so for somebody to look me in the eyes, not only say they were there to serve me, but to travel thousands of miles to do that, it had a huge impact. And so in the early days, I think, after that, I was just, I became inspired to pay it forward. So I was taught when you receive, you got to match it. If you got to break even, or you got to get out of debt. And so I was looking for caregivers to serve and doing the same things like that those friends did for us. They stained our deck, they cut the leaves out of our gutters. They're very much knocking out the honeydew list of things that I had, fallen behind on. And I knew how to do those things. So that was the kind of stuff that I was hunting down people to do those things for. And so that's what I did. What I know now, looking back on it, is the deeper issue was the isolation that I was experiencing. And so that was sort of a story I think I was telling myself to meet a need, which was to feel connected to people who understood. That's what the real motivation was. Because the other part of that story I left out is we moved to Minnesota in the middle of all of that. And so, and I didn't know anyone here, not a single person. Sarah had a few friends, but the isolation was intensified by that in many ways. So I was very much looking for connection. But I only know that now. At the time, I thought I was looking for people's car to change their oil. And
Just checking with you about that, the isolation piece and then awakening to what this is like and paying it back because it feels so impactful. My guess would be you surpassed well, I got to give back in equal measure. You have given back. I mean, does it feel to you you've given back sufficiently? even though you're still giving. It's like you're one with the process now. And it wasn't an exchange. It is a pay it forward because this is the thing to do.
That's a good question. I try not to attach my value as a person to what I put into the world. I think I do because that's how I was raised. But I'm trying to not attach those two things. But I just wouldn't know what else to do. Man, this is why I'm here, and it's something that, like any job, there are parts of it that I love, and there are parts of it that I wish I never would have to do again.
Sure.
But I try not to think about anything other than I need to be willing to receive, and I need to be able to give. And so, it's both, right? Like I think I went through many years where I was too proud to receive, too proud to ask for help, especially in the early days when we started this coalition. I was definitely full of myself and did just had a lot to learn, and I still do, but I'm I'm wiser now, and I'm not at all afraid to accept help because that's where the real magic happens.
Yeah, I love the vision of the elliptical on its side, which is I'm giving, you're receiving, you're giving, I'm receiving. It's like this beautiful dance because you can't really do one without the other in a full way. Could
That's right.
you share with us the structure of Jack's? There's so many things that you provide. Would love to hear about those things so we can have a fuller picture of really what you've created and what is being served for these people.
Yeah, so I think it's important to start with the mission, which is to improve the way that guys think, feel, and act through every phase of their caregiving journey.
Mhm.
And a few years into having that clarity of the mission, there was we would notice folks who hadn't been caregivers seemed a little bit perplexed. Funders, for example, so wait a minute, the people you're serving don't have a disease. They're not sick. What I know now is to say, no, they actually do. It's called isolation. I didn't know that then. But the question that we asked ourselves is, why is that important? We know why as caregivers, but we need to be able to articulate it to folks who don't know what that's like. And we came around to this idea that it's because of what we call the hero fixes it alone culture that men grow up in, and that men are taught we fix things and we fix them by ourselves. That's what my dad taught me. That's what his dad taught him. And when you're encountered with a caregiving role, many times there is no fixing it. There's a lot of trying to. If there is, you're probably not equipped to fix it. You're not a surgeon. You're not a clinician. You don't develop drugs. And so that's the why. It's to dismantle that hero fixes it alone culture. Like that's the big picture, right? Like that is probably going to take longer than my lifetime for this to ultimately happen. I hope it doesn't, but cultures change slowly. So how we go about doing that is we think of ourselves as a hospitality company. Like I said before, we do a lot of things, right? Like you mentioned, we have classes, we have a coaching program, we have a conference that we've launched. All of these things, though, have one thing in common, and that's to connect caregivers with other caregivers who are further along on that journey.
Mhm.
And so that's what we do, really. We're in the business of human connection, which when we started this, I don't think we knew how much the world would need it and what's going on, in the world with the way the digital environment so many of us live in, which we're more connected now than we've ever been, right? But at the same time, we're less connected than we've ever been. We were also searching for ways for men to feel more included. And if we use the language of support group, we thought that we might lose people. I've kind of drifted away from that, but I also still believe there are men out there who have just had bad experiences with support groups, or they watched Fight Club one too many times, and there are all these Hollywood presentations of support groups that are not helpful at all, and so some of it was just trying to call it something else so their minds will be open. But fundamentally, that's what it is.
Yeah. And so it sounds like the bumping into the stereotype of that hero figure. The Marlboro man is isolated, does his own thing, doesn't ask for help, doesn't receive support because that shows that he's weak. And so,
That's right.
Yeah. And it's still out there.
For sure. And I should just add, sometimes you're so close to something, it's really hard to see it. The clutch, a couple of other things that are different about it from a routine support group. Many support groups operate on a cohort model where you're assigned a group and you have so many sessions and then you sort of graduate. We found that doesn't work for caregivers. So ours is whoever signs up and shows up. And we have a very, very structured approach. We brainstorm topics. We vote on the topics. So in that way, we're able to democratically build the agenda with the people that show up. I, as a host or facilitator, don't have to anticipate what is Jeffrey worrying about. The participants bring that to the meeting. And then we always provide free food and drinks in a private space. Where we're currently doing it is at the Urban Growler in St. Paul. And it's for all caregivers. It's not just for those that identify as men. I've always marveled at the amount of laughter that happens in these gatherings. And I mention that to sort of dismantle the notion that some may have that this is just going to bring me down. Other people's stuff is, I'm carrying my own, and now I'm going to have to carry other people's. And that has probably been true for some, but overwhelmingly what I've seen is laughter in one moment, tears in the next. It's just like the emotional Olympics, and it's just beautiful. I'm just so proud of what our team does every single clutch. I would hold it up to any support group anywhere.
Yeah. When my former partner was dying of metastatic breast cancer, I did attend a clutch, as you know. And I remember there were like 15 people in the room. And you're right, the structure was great. The format was good. The process was, I felt held. And then after a while, I was like, this veil went away. And I was like, oh my God, these people, they know what I'm experiencing because they've lived it on some level. And I feel like I'm seen in a way that nobody else really sees me. And that was remarkably refreshing and very warming. And I still have emotions about that. So I'm right with you with what you're talking about.
So glad to hear that was your experience. For some of it too is, one of my favorite things to see is the first timers when they come, because they have that experience that I did when my friends came to visit me. We look them in the eyes and we say, we're here to serve you. And it can blow their minds. They're just like, wait a minute, this is for me? Like, this whole thing is about me and my experience. And that can start a journey for them of like, okay, this is worth figuring out. This is worth understanding. This is something I can feel more equipped to do. There's hope. And of course, I'm not alone. Like, look at all these other people. And if we could really, I just wish we could see everyone in the world that is actively caregiving, because it's an astonishing percentage of the population, right? I don't have a number handy, but it's a lot of people.
It is. I think it's probably a first blush awareness of, oh, I didn't know that I needed this until I experienced it. And this is very profound. And this is going to push my buttons because I don't receive. I'm not used to this. I'm the one in the role to provide. How can I receive if I'm providing? That's conflictual on some level.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's many topics that come up every time. They don't always get the most votes, but a lot of times it does, and it usually is self-care related, you know. There's more and more people coming are aware they need to give themselves care, but they just don't know how to do it. They don't know how to start, you know.
Sure.
It's I've been a part of this coalition, and I still identify as a caregiver today, even though my loved one passed away, and I don't have it figured out. I know what I don't know, at least. But
That's half the battle right there.
yes.
Wow. Do you think that men, this is very tongue in cheek in a way, do you think men should put on their resume, caregiver?
I saw that question and I loved it. I believe that, you know, I try not to get in the business of telling people what they should or shouldn't do.
Thank you.
But it would be a beautiful world if caregivers were valued the way so many other professions, if you will, or just disciplines or practices in the world are. Because what's more important than that? Having someone to care for you. You know, my LinkedIn, I'm a strengthener of non-professional caregivers. So I don't know if that's really the same thing, but I long for a world where I don't know if the resume is the right, I just wish the world valued it and saw it for what it is.
Thank you
which
for
is
that.
the hardest job in the world and the most important.
Thank you for expanding on that. That was great. You have this construction management background and then this caregiving, you bridge these very different worlds in a way. And I guess I'm curious, what might you recommend to men who are interested in doing something like that? They maybe find themselves in a traditional or a more typical kind of work that fits men who concrete, get the job done, use their hands, whatever. And then now caregiving in a very different way. Any recommendations for them if they're interested in bridging like you have?
It's hard. These transitions, you know, professionally and an identity or even just any identity change at all is significantly difficult. For me, it was. Maybe for others it's easier. I just didn't know what I didn't know when I decided to do it. And I'm kind of glad I didn't, because maybe I wouldn't have if I would have known how difficult it was going to be. But I think so for anyone, and I've almost every caregiver we've encountered who has a full-time job at some point starts to lose passion for their work, their paid gig. I think to some extent, caregiving changes you. It changes your values. You know, when you see suffering up close every day, I don't know that if you're human, you could avoid being changed by that. And so then when you go to work and the things that your colleagues and others are wrestling with just don't feel important anymore. Right. It's, you know, they're trying to figure out which car to buy, and it's the biggest crisis of their life. And so I've seen that, and I think that was part of what happened to me. You know, what I knew is if I didn't build this building, there was 16 other contractors lined up behind me that would be happy to do it. But it's tough, and I don't know that there's very much opportunities in the world for men to find a professional outlet, because again, caregiving and caregivers are just not valued the way that they should be, even by healthcare systems who are arguably getting the most value out of them, because we are an extension of that system. You know, we provide so much of that care, and even those systems don't value it to the extent that they should. I know that they value it, and it's starting to change, right? Like there's legislation being passed. There's momentum, and it's all headed in the right direction, and we'll get there someday. I wish I was just on a call with a caregiver earlier today who's doing that juggling act of trying to pay the bills, trying to care for my family. They're both important. Which one do I do? And of course, you have to do both. And it just breaks my heart because I know exactly what that feels like.
Yeah. I also wonder whether there's a difference for people who own their own business and are caregivers at the same time. Because when crazy medical challenges arise and you can't just go to work because you have to take them to the hospital, it impacts so much of your week, and then you don't get paid because this is your business. I wonder if that's a type of stress you hear about compared to someone who has employment full-time someplace else or part-time someplace else and does the caregiving and different things to juggle in a way.
Oh, absolutely. The sole practitioners, the folks that are, out there, hustling in all kinds of disciplines. If they're not working, there's no work getting done. And so there's no revenue. And, and I also, we went down to HCMC and talked to the oncology team there, and many of the breast cancer clinicians were saying, we see Latina mothers coming in with their kids for breast cancer treatment. The father's not there. And of course, he can't be because he's got the kind of job where he's paid when he's physically present. And so that just breaks your heart because you just know he would give anything to be there with his family. And he can't. And those are just two perspectives. I'm sure there are many, many others that are hard in different ways. This idea that, some men struggle with the identity of caregiver because it feels perhaps maternal or feminine. So I might say, well, would you identify as a provider? And, oh, yeah, absolutely. And what is caregiving if it's not providing? It's language, right? Like it just gets in the way sometimes. And so, probably not going to change it to Jack's Provider Coalition, but that's what we're doing. We're providing for our families.
Your segue is perfect because that's where we're headed next. The whole thing about gender oriented language and name calling. Number one, is care provider, caregiver, all genders? Some people say, well, I was talking to the female police officer, or I was talking to the male nurse, or I was talking to the co-ed, whatever. It's like, do we have to qualify that? And yet many people do. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about that. And do you talk with staff at Jack's about use of language this way?
In management, that can kind of feel like your job all the time is just language management and navigating communications, right? Because ultimately that's what we have to do is communicate effectively. I try not to come up with too many like thou shalt nots kinds of things, but we generally avoid male caregiver. I think for me, it's not human, any kind of creature. It's like a non-human. And it just sounds weird. So typically we say men who are caregivers. For many, many years, I pushed against the board that I worked for to make Jack's more of a all caregivers because I don't honestly care what kind of genitalia you have as far as supporting you. I know you're a caregiver. It's hard for everyone. The board, and I think they were wise, pushed against me and convinced me that men are, and this is a stereotype, but men struggle more in this role in many ways than women do because we're just less naturally equipped. And also there is no one else doing this, to our knowledge, anywhere with a agency fully focused on men in caregiving roles. And so that's why we focus on men. Our programming is available to all caregivers. There's certain programs that aren't, like our Jack to Jack, but many of them are. That's because it's easy to be inclusive And I've never seen a situation where someone who wasn't male counseling or coaching a male, and that wasn't as or more effective. Oftentimes the women in the groups can be the first to see and have a better ability to, that deer in the headlights look, help.
Did I hear you say men are less well equipped?
It's my belief that more men feel less equipped to be caregivers when it happens. There are many who figure it out very, very fast. And this is why I'm so inspired by what I'm seeing changing is, we're hearing from men more like right away, rather than for many years we would hear, I've had your brochure on my desk for 6 years and now she's in hospice and now I need your help. We're starting to hear like, okay, I surrender. You guys have been in this sandbox a lot longer than me. Sure. help. And those are the guys who, I think we should aspire to be, because they waste less time making mistakes that other people have made.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your qualification there. It reminded me of when I was in the fatherhood field, and people would say, well, men are just not as good at taking care of kids.
It's kind of like discerning maternal from paternal love. And men are 100% capable, and I don't think society rewards it to the extent that it rewards other things. Yeah. So oftentimes, one of our founders was a stay-at-home dad when we met him. I think that was just so fortunate for us, because the other two of us were, busy professionals, and he brought a whole different perspective to that neither one of us had. And we learned so much from him.
That's cool. I led ECFE, early childhood family education classes, for 3 years in St. Paul for fathers that raised children full time, or the primary care providers. And I did that my first with my son for the first year. And it really opened my eyes up to all sorts of beautiful things. Why do you think society struggles so much with this expectation or the acceptance of men in caregiving roles?
I have no idea. I honestly don't. My suspicion is it's just the way it's always been. And so,
well, I tend to agree that we have incredible walls of expectation, projections of stereotypical, what defines men, masculinity, the whole 9 yards, very retro, I would say. And so that can really get in the way for a lot of men who want to find a different path. And so, this whole thing about people say, oh, you're helping out, or, oh, are you babysitting your kids today? You're helping around the house. It seems like it's very difficult for other people and some men to understand that role and see it as normative, healthy, right, okay. So I'm just curious what you think about that.
I feel committed to changing it. And I think that the way these things are changed is through action and through grassroots organizations like ourselves and many others who are just saying enough, like this has got to change. And largely it's changed by money. We have to raise money so we can pay people to do the work that needs to be done. More than anything, it's this generation of men, which we are hearing. There's a caregiving study being released this summer by the National Family Caregiver Alliance that shows the gender gap closing between men and women who identify, and that's closing amongst the younger men. The needle's moving in the right direction, but it takes dedication and intention. And in my own role as a father of 5 kids, it's me demonstrating to them what it looks like. The little things, doing domestic stuff in the house. It's also the bigger things, like opening up emotionally to my kids instead of bottling it up and trying to project perfection emotionally, or that's how we learned all this stuff, right? Is watching our parents. And that's how we were programmed, and we didn't even know it. And so I've gone through some really tough stuff, and more than once I've cried in my kids' chest, and they've held me. And, some might say that's not appropriate, and I just say, well, you don't know my son and you don't know me.
That's right.
Because for us, it was absolutely appropriate. And because of that, we have a relationship that's absolutely as strong as any that could ever be. So I think that's also how we change it, is we just start to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what are we modeling for others as leaders, as in our families or at work?
Yeah.
And that's how it can start.
Quite beautiful. And so it sounds like your own evolution of, man, or your own masculinity has opened to more fullness through what you've been through. And then you give that, again, the elliptical, to your son. And that connection, cements and beautifies and grows and deepens and just continues.
Yes.
How beautiful. And why wouldn't we want to support more of that in the world? Yeah, because everybody benefits.
I think there's a fear. I know for me, at least, the fear was as a cheerleader, caregiver, my job is to keep everybody in an optimistic mood and a belief. And
sure.
If we go down the dark road, maybe we won't come back.
Sure.
And that's just, in my experience, not been. It's the opposite result has always happened when I've chosen vulnerability or opening up, and that person has the opportunity to support me, which is meaningful to them. Back to that elliptical analogy. And it just bonds us, like it strengthens our connection. And there's this fragility in masculinity that is, I even think about a few years ago, I was making dinner for the family, and my wife asked me, where's the sour cream? And I just had a hissy fit. I went bananas because I had tried so hard to make this taco dinner perfect, and she just shined this big old flashlight on the weak spot, which was I forgot the sour cream. And that was a failure on my part, or, I think it illuminated the fragility in me. I'm the magic in this situation. And I didn't say these words, but I think this is the feeling that I was having, which was, how dare you point out I'm not perfect. So I've just come to believe that, opening up, or there's a strength that's required to open your heart. And if you can find that strength, it will help it grow and stretch to hold everything instead of breaking, which when we opt for the lock it down, white knuckle approach, avoid, don't feel, that's when our hearts break. And sometimes they can't be put back together. So that's what I advocate for, is it's truly the courageous choice to open up. Whether you're opening up to a therapist or to your friends or to a colleague, it's scary because what's going to happen? But it's important.
Yeah. What a powerful message you have. And I want men in particular to hear that message. And what I tell my clients is, intimacy born of vulnerability is the heart of true, authentic relating. Because vulnerability comes from the original meaning of the word. It's associated with wound. If my heart had been wounded, why would I show you the place where you could just put the sword right in? The last place I want to show you. Most the time, when you are willing to do that, people see how potentially devastating that may be. And so you're courageously saying, here it is. And they go, oh my gosh, thank you. And then they want to give in kind something back. And that's where this elliptical of receptive, vulnerable presence can really deepen, which is why the connection tends to solidify so beautifully.
Yes. And it so often between caregiver and caregetter, or, care receiver,
Yeah.
there's so much hurt, and there's so much pain that we are trying to protect each other from, that it's really tragic, because I've seen what that lack of vulnerability can do over time, and it's basically estrangement. The emotional intimacy, if it was there, is lost. And now we're not connected emotionally, and we're emotional creatures, like it or not. That's what we are. I wish that people could spend less time protecting each other from their truths and from their suffering, and more time opening up and unpacking those things. And oftentimes, if it's gotten bad enough, you need the support of a therapist who can help, because it can be tricky if it's been years and suddenly you're just opening up this thing. I think Esther Perel wrote it: the quality of our lives is determined by the quality of our relationships. And I firmly believe that.
Yeah, I like her work. It makes me imagine that Jack's program has, something in the spirit of helping caregivers or couples, with that communication process, or something to address that dance. Otherwise, that's a missed opportunity to hear about something that could be very important for them. And I'm sure it comes up in clashes, but
Yeah.
so when you were growing up, were there any messages about vulnerability? This is what males do, caregiving, care participation, or is it just receiving? What was your environment that sculpted who you were in those early years?
No, there was just modeling, right? And my father modeled a very traditionally masculine father. He came up through the trades. He was a machinist. He hung drywall. He went on to build a construction company and run it. My mother was a nurse, and she worked nights, and then she came home and took care of kids all day. So those things I saw, but I didn't see myself, in my mom. I just saw, like, wow, I'm loved to the core, and I'll never have to worry about that. And my dad was the one kicking me in the ass and saying, you need to get better grades, and why don't you have a job yet? And all of those things. I don't really know anything other than that until, once I became a caregiver is when it got real for me. And of course I would say now that I was when I was married and had kids, and before Sarah got sick, I didn't identify that way. It's just foreign to me.
Sure. It's so interesting to me that with your father's background in the hands-on labor work world, and your mother's nursing, which is such a caregiving profession, and then you end up in the construction management field and now provide caregiving support. It's like you've taken the best from both parents and created an amalgam that serves humanity and you through the gifts that you've received.
Well, thank you. I've tried to, and I left construction and the reason I fell into it is because I didn't know what else to do. And that's why a lot of people end up in construction. It's what their dad did. And
Sure.
so that's how I ended up there. And turns out I wasn't very good at it. I can do math, but it's hard for me. I was much more naturally equipped for softer skills, relationship building and communications, and other things were much more my gifts. But I was able to bring what I learned in that career into this one, and it's been helpful. I think my mom, though, she really taught me what it means. Sarah was diagnosed. She probably knew at some level I didn't have the ability to ask for help. And so what she told me was, I'm moving in. She lived in Texas at the time. I lived in Virginia. She packed her car up and moved in with us. I was at least smart enough not to say no to that. But that's who my mom is. She incredible person.
Yeah, beautiful. You had said prior that you used to only feel safe after having an emotional meltdown when you were alone. I'm curious you talked about tonight crying on the chest of your child. So how did you go from alone meltdown to not meltdown, expression of upset to doing so with your child? For other people who are like, oh boy, how do you do that? I would love to be able to do that. Well, what do you got?
One of my personal core values is courage. And to me, courage, when I say that, I don't mean the heroic kind, like, you saved 1,000 people in a fire. I mean, daily showing up and being open about who you are and how you're feeling. And a lot of this is inspired by Brene Brown's work and vulnerability and just all of the work that's gone on to really just dismantle that idea that vulnerability is weakness. It takes strength and it takes courage. For me, that's kind of the soundtrack in my head. And so at work, at home, when I've just become more in tune to my emotional state. I can feel my heart start to accelerate. I can feel my face get hot. I'm just more in tune with what's going on inside me. And I've slowly over time gotten better at communicating that without scaring people. I have scared people. I have made many mistakes doing it, but what I've discovered is when people understand you're trying and they love you and they care about you, it's going to be okay. We're humans, and it's messy. And I've come to believe if it's not messy, you're not doing it right. There's just something that you're hiding or something that it should feel messy. That's my mantra is courage. And it takes courage to open up. And, sometimes you're afraid to say that thing that you're thinking or feeling because what's going to happen, In workplaces, it's been known for many, many years that healthy teams are willing to engage in conflict. And this conflict aversion is so unhealthy, but it happens everywhere, because same thing. It's messy and it's scary, and it's just easier to let it roll on by. I'm certainly not going to sit here and tell you that it's easy to do or that I've got it figured out, because, I'm a leader in my company and I have made many mistakes where I have maybe let a little too much emotion show. It went beyond emotional connection and it just came out wrong. And what I've learned about that is apologize.
Yes, beautiful. That's so much better than going into shame or guilt or beating yourself up or,
Oh, yeah. And I did all those things too. But ultimately, the secret weapon is own it and apologize. There you are again with, I don't have this figured out. And you get nothing but respect and admiration for that when it's heartfelt and it's genuine and they know that.
Yeah, it's true. Brene Brown talks about this. The detoxification of what is called shame will happen when we allow for humility to be present. And the courage to do so socially is really part of the vulnerability and the courage. We have to be willing to be humble and say, yes, this is what I did, and let me clean it up, apologize. I'm not gonna shame myself over it, but I will learn from it.
That's right.
Yeah. That level of self-compassion takes a while to learn. If you're like how I was and sometimes am, especially when you're in a pressure-filled role as caregiver or whatever, and you judge or criticize or blame another man for how he is being either stereotypically or showing up in certain emotional ways or, not caregiving in a certain style that you're like, no, don't do that. It is like a projection, especially in the early stages. I'm projecting onto this guy how he should be doing this because I'm still working through that myself. And I don't know if you did or sometimes do any of that.
Well, I certainly have in the past, and I think sometimes our reaction to things, it just happens. We can't judge ourselves too harshly for these automatic responses that just happen. And I have no business judging anyone about anything, because if you've met one caregiver, you've met one caregiver.
Yeah.
That's it. And we try as a society and as a industry who supports caregivers to try to find themes and patterns, and they're there, but none of us know what that person is really feeling or experiencing. It's a result of their education, the modeling. And I firmly believe that every caregiver is bringing his best to that every single day and striving for excellence. No caregiver I've ever met is really trying to F it up. Like, they're not. They're doing their best. So it's our job to meet them where they're at. I can tell a story. We show up at the hospital or in situations as a community for the people that have invested in the community. I tell people, you'll get out of this community what you put into it and more. And this individual had put a lot into it. And this was not very long ago. And I've told him over the last few years, because I've seen his smoking, I've seen his drinking. I can see the blood pressure on his face, And I told him what my boys said to me after Sarah died, which was, what's going to happen to me if something happens to you?
Oh, yeah. Oh.
And I had never thought about that. And I was running an organization who supports men who are caregivers, and that had never occurred to me till my 12-year-old stared me in the eyes, and he wasn't joking. He was dead serious, and he was scared. And I was scared. So that started me on a journey to take care of myself much, much better. And so I was telling this individual that story. And then, so we're at the hospital. His spouse is at the end of her life. He is coaching his kids to go into the hospital room and say goodbye to their mom. And I had the privilege to be there and, to support him. But right before that happened, several of our people were there and very, very passionate about helping him, trying to share all their lessons learned. I appreciate the enthusiasm, but it's like, we need to give him some space. Or I ask this individual, what do you need? He says, I need fresh air. I said, all right, let's go get some fresh air. That's a brilliant idea. Hospitals are stuffy. Nobody wants to be in here. And then he said, well, what I really mean is I need a cigarette. He didn't want to tell me that. So I just said, well, can I have one? And he looked at me like I had hit my head on something. And I was like, no, I'm serious. I want to come with you and have one. And so we went and smoked together in front of this hospital with a big old sign that said no smoking, where we were smoking, and we were laughing, and I was choking and like lightheaded, and but it was
great story.
The world doesn't need more judgment, and especially in times like these. Like, of course, I wouldn't keep smoking with him, and I wouldn't encourage that behavior. But in that moment and what he's going through, that cigarette is not the problem here. So I just say all that. That's been a journey for me to divorce myself from this idea that I know how to do this any better than anyone else, or that I have any awareness of what that person is really going through. And when you do that, and do that for everyone in your life, and it's liberating, trust me, because judging people is exhausting, in my opinion. Just let go of that.
It's a great story. And the part about that I like the most is the affirmation that being with someone and showing up for them, sometimes you're meeting him where he's at in a very particular way. And as a caregiver, that sends a message that is phenomenally powerful. It's this alignment that he probably could not get in a lot of other places from someone who is not typically going to smoke with him, but he's probably feeling very met And that's a beautiful gift from a caregiver to someone who needs it.
Yeah, I hope so. That's the intention, right? Is
Yeah, that's the
is
intention.
to make that person feel less alone and more understood. And there's a power in, and I should mention that with everyone that works here at Jack's, there are some volunteers who do have a clinical background, but that's coincidence because they've been a caregiver. That we are primarily guys that have just been through this and come from, Jeff Myrie, who is like basically runs this place now. I'm out doing things like this and more of an evangelist, but Jeff's in the tip of the spear doing the frontline work. He used to run around in a gorilla suit for work. And he's been an actor and he teaches improv. He's had a really amazing career. He's supported people with disabilities for many years, helping them find jobs. But he's got the heart size of a suburban and he brings it to this work. And, something he's taught me is a lot of times what our work is improv. I think the reason I was able to have the effect I had on that gentleman, that story I told you, is because of what I learned from Jeff about improv. You just deal with what is. And that in that moment, what was he needed support. And so I was able to give it to him because of what I learned from Jeff about improv.
Great. It's really great. I want to take a turn into the darker departments if you don't mind. Let's talk about burnout and caregiver burnout, which I experienced as a very visceral, real thing. But I'm curious what your experience is and if you have any recommendations and things to be thoughtful of, for people who are in a caregiver role and who have burnout.
My suspicion about the root cause is it's an identity issue, and that when we're showing up in the world every day with tasks and activities that don't feel attached to our identity, in my case as a caregiver, my identity was wrapped up in being a project manager in construction and running large construction projects and getting hundreds of emails every day and answering them. But then I was also running kids around to their things and taking Sarah to her appointments and doing emotional labor with Sarah that I didn't know how to do, but I was doing my best. That's where I think the opportunity is to consider, what does that mean? What if my identity is different from the way I'm showing up in the world every day? Either I should consider showing up in the world differently or changing my identity, because I think that's where the burnout comes in. And then as far as, or I'll say another thing that comes to mind is the Art of Loving by Eric Fromm, a book written in the 50s, I believe. I remember, and I didn't read the whole thing. I have lots of friends who send me things and they, highlight like sections because I'm not a great reader. I can't sit still long enough to read. He writes very eloquently in that book to me, it was about the golden rule. When I was taught the golden rule, I grew up in a Christian home in the South. It was 100% focused on everyone else. Love others as you love yourself was not about loving yourself. It was 100% about loving others.
Sure.
And what he's pointing out in that book is that it's actually implies you love yourself to the same extent that you love others.
Sure.
And I just thought that it's such a beautiful thing that's been lost in the golden rule. I believe we have a responsibility to have compassion for ourselves to the same extent that we have compassion for others. And if we're able to do that, we won't burn out. We just won't.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. Very thoughtful. Thank you for that. Do you think caregiver burnout is different for male care providers than for female?
Hmm, that's a good question. My gut reaction is probably not. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think men are maybe more susceptible because we are less inclined to reach out and connect and open up to our friends, and we're taught to just everything's fine. I've got this. I'm good. I know.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
women have more permission to not do that, and I think the burnout can happen in a more, like, for me it was a very, I don't know if catastrophic's the right word, but it was years and years of stuff came out in a matter of a few hours, and I don't judge myself for that. I did the work. I just wouldn't do it that way again. And we've asked our community if you could go back in time and tell yourself day of diagnosis, or if we've asked folks who've lost their person, we call them sequel makers, what would you tell someone who just lost their person? And one of the themes that came up from almost every respondent is, you've got to feel this. There's no easy button. There's no escaping it. That's what we're all trying to do, is not feel this stuff. And so I think avoiding burnout is not avoiding feelings. It's doing the work, which is feeling the stuff,
Yes.
and not just the horrible stuff, right? It's all of it. There's so many beautiful moments in caregiving situations that are impossible to describe to other people. Feel that too. When something amazing happens at work or at home, there's a big win. Feel that. I learned so much from my kids when Sarah was in hospice, and they would go to their friend's house that same day after being with their mom, who was in hospice at a young age. And with their mom, they would be obviously melancholy and sad and down and crying. And the same afternoon, they're jumping on a trampoline, having the time of their lives with their friends. And to me, that's how you avoid burnout, is you just feel whatever comes your way. And of course, kids get a little more to be messy, and but I think we can learn a lot from the younger ones about how to be in this world.
I think that's absolutely brilliant. They say love brings up everything unlike itself. So, in the spirit of these shadow elements, have you heard a lot of care providers talking about their level of pain and or burnout and the suffering and their loved one suffering, and the combination of that just feels sometimes so crippling and suffocating and agonizing. And the mind, I mean, I've seen this with clients, the mind is searching for a way out of that level of suffering. There are times when people are so depressed, their mind says, well, you can turn your car into the embankment and end it. People say, I don't want to do that. But my mind told, it's like, I have these thoughts. Sure, because you're suffering and you want not to suffer. So for care providers, my guess is there are times when it's like, I just want my loved one to be in a better place because this is so painful and this is so hard. And so do you encourage the reality if that's where they're at? Do you talk about that at the clutches? What's the approach you have when things are just that way?
Like when a caregiver is wishing their person this could be done. And,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I think the first thing we do is, if we're in a group environment, us as organizers, we let the group go first. And, obviously if we were to hear any kind of judgment or blame, or we would interject and get involved. But I've never seen that happen. All I've ever seen is everyone's like, we've all thought that, and that's part of the power of our groups, is many times these folks are in support groups with their person and they cannot share that thought.
Well said.
So hopefully they've got a therapist they can share it with, or hopefully they've got a friend or a group like ours, because if you've seen suffering up close, over and over again, and you don't wish for it to stop, then you're an AI or something, because it's unspeakable. That's the kind of safety we strive to create psychologically in our groups, is that anything that you have thought or felt is valid, and it isn't necessarily like the thing you want to keep thinking, or it's just you have. And I've only ever seen when people have the courage to open up about those more difficult topics. People might have scribbled their ideas about what they want to talk about. And then when somebody has, whoa, never mind, I'm not voting for my topic, I want to talk about that. And that's when the real magic happens. And it only happens because someone has the courage to go first. And I can tell you, when Sarah passed away, she suffered from this disease for almost 9 years, endured 187 rounds of chemotherapy.
Oh,
I think there were people in the world who were kind of, for those of us that were closest to it, they were kind of baffled by our relief.
right.
Like we weren't sobbing messes. I mean, there were moments, but generally, at the celebration of life and these things, like, but what they didn't see was the 9 years that we did.
Yes.
And so that's another thing we're able to help caregivers with, is that's a real stigma coming out into the community after a loss or during a loss, and not being sad enough. Like, you're not doing it right. There's a right way to do this. And it's like, no, they don't get to do that. They just don't. Right. And it's because they're not in it like you are.
Yeah.
And so we help caregivers have more confidence that there isn't a right way to do this, but the way you're doing it is perfect.
Right. I think about grief that way. If caregivers' loved one passes and they're not falling apart in the more typical grief kind of reactivity, one reason is because they've started their grief earlier. They've been having the grief process along the way, and somehow, consciously or unconsciously or both, making peace with that reality. And it's right. Different. It's just different.
Yeah, it starts at the day of diagnosis. That's something that we, as a coalition, we have a responsibility to help people understand, is that, a lot of what you're going through is grief. And what is grief? It's love. It's because you care about this person. And this whole idea that we should get over it and move on and all of these things, like, well, yeah, if you didn't love that person, you could. But we grieve to the extent that we love. And so we tell people that are grieving, be proud. You're showing the world how much you cared about that person. That's something the world needs. And you will move forward. You will carry that person with you, and you will miss them for the rest of your life. That will never change. Hopefully it will soften. And over time, when I'm able to talk to folks who've lost kids, and the only thing that's left is gratitude for the time that they had with those kids, that tells me that anything is possible if we do the work.
You've talked about the power of gratitude. And is that part of the work is hard work? And then after it's a parabolic curve, perhaps. You go down and you do that grief work and you do whatever there is emotionally for you. And because of that, the counterbalance gratitude is higher because you went deeper. It's like saying, well, I can't grieve something that I didn't really have a connection with. But if I had incredible connection, great appreciation, gratitude, love, oh my God, the depth of that loss and the bereavement is so much greater. And so similarly, what you work through allows for greater gratitude. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're just, thinking through what about that experience, when you reflect, stood out that I'm just so grateful for. And every time we do that, we relive that experience. oftentimes in the middle of a crisis, at least me, I'm more inclined to focus on what was horrible about it and what I'm not grateful for. As we get more disciplined in practicing gratitude, we're able to, because I remember like my parents wanting an update about, these are my parents, and they're wanting an update about how the surgery went or whatever. And I finally said, I can't. Like every time I tell this story, I relive it. And I'll maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, but not right now. And that was progress. You know, I at least knew how to protect myself a little bit, so I could keep functioning. But the reverse is also true, that when we are reflecting on a positive experience or an experience with someone who just lifted us up and made us feel loved or supported or seen, and we reflect on that and journal about it, we live it again. I think it also gets better like every time we relive it. And so those are the people that inspire me, the ones who are, and I even, for my kids who, Sarah loved squirrels. We passed out peanuts at her celebration of life for everyone to feed the squirrels. And lucky for us, squirrels are everywhere. And so we talk about her all the time. And when there's one just going to town on our bird feeder, it's like, yeah, that was Sarah at work. She would never give up.
Yeah.
So
That's
yeah.
beautiful. Oh, I love that. It keeps the memory and a little bit of laughter, and it nourishes the heart, and it also shows you where you're like, oh, ow, but so it's an interesting thing. Is there anything else you want to share with us before we come to our last questions?
I guess I would just mention our 10-year goal. In the next 10 years, we aim to strengthen at least 1 million men who are caregivers. Mm-hmm. And when I say strengthen, I mean the strength to ask for help and accept it without needing to owe someone a beer in return, the strength to rely on a team, the strength to care for yourself while you're caring for others, and the strength to open your heart so it can grow and not break. And so we're rethinking strength, right? Like what it looks like. But that's our big goal, and that's what I'm dedicating the next 10 years of my life to accomplishing. And I think if we can imagine a world full of men like that, where caregiving isn't a solo burden, it's a team effort, where men are recognized as like compassionate athletes and not like outliers. Caregiving isn't viewed as just a woman's role, because last time I checked, love and responsibility don't come with gender labels. And so that's our vision. And if anyone feels called or inspired by that, please reach out, because we need your help. It's going to take a lot of effort from a lot of people and a lot of resources to change the culture that we're in.
Well, I'm inspired by it. That's one reason why I wanted to do this conversation with you. So I just want to say I'm very, very grateful for you, for what you do. I'm inspired at your work, your mission, the heart you have. And so in a way, you're really, again, you're bringing mom's nurturant nursing capacity to the construction of bringing about an organization in the world that needs to be constructed and thrive so that the world can thrive. And that's a beautiful gift. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for your support and for inviting us here to share this, because this is how it happens, right? Like many right here in the Twin Cities have no idea that we even exist, and we've been here for 10 years. So thank you for your help in changing.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And I'd like to leave you with a quote that I feel is a gift to you as a way of saying thank you. Your heart is big, your hands are strong, and your soul is kind. Thank you for caring for our family, selfless, sacrificing, and supportive. You give all of yourself to caring for others, and we are so grateful for you. never ever doubt what a difference your caregiving means. So thank you, Kyle, and all that you do.
It's an honor, Jeffrey. Thank you.